I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. A lot to get to tonight, and you can bet that we're going to get deeper into the Alaska Airlines flight that's dominating local and national headlines. But first, let's talk about the foster care system in Oregon. Now, according to the state of Oregon, 4,611 children were in foster care in the state as of January 1st of 2024. Of those, 50% live with relatives. In a perfect world, every child would be treated with love and compassion. But unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world. We live in a real world. And that's not always the case. It's led to cultural battles over rules focused on who can be a foster parent. It's something we've seen right here in Oregon, and now the federal government is getting involved at a nationwide level. And that's our big story tonight. Here's what's going on. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services is proposing a new rule that would require anyone who wants to be a foster parent to support LGBTQ kids in their care. It's a rule that's already in place in Oregon, but it's come up against opposition here in the past year. We're going to remind you about the Oregon case that we've previously reported on, and then we're going to expand our vision to what's happening nationally. Now, you might remember the story of Jessica Bates. She's a mom of 5 in Malheur County. She wants to foster 2 siblings and eventually adopt them, but when she went to do her foster parent training, she found out she'd have to support LGBTQ kids. To support them under Oregon law means all kinds of things. Letting the kids be open about their attraction to people with other genders, letting them use the name and pronouns that best suit their gender identity, letting them dress to show how they want. It also means as a foster parent seeking medical care appropriate to their gender and sexual identity. Jessica Bates said that as a Christian, she could not do all of those things, that they go against her religious beliefs. Here's what she told the Oregon Department of Human Services. I cannot support this behavior in a child. I have no problem loving them and accepting them as they are, but I would not encourage them in this behavior. I believe God gives us our gender, sex, and it's not something that we get to choose. She went on to say that providing gender-affirming medical care like hormone therapy or puberty blockers would be child abuse. So, DHS denied her application, saying that if she refused to support LGBTQ kids, she didn't meet the requirements to be a foster parent in Oregon. Bates, the woman who wants to be the foster mom, then turned around and sued, saying that the state was violating her First Amendment rights and free speech and free religion. She asked a court to suspend the rule requiring her to support the LGBTQ kids, but late last year an Oregon judge ruled against her. Judge Adrienne Nelson wrote, "The court questions whether plaintiff's willingness to love and support a child is sufficient to ensure that the child will feel loved and supported." The judge went on to say that although Bates claims she would love an LGBTQ child in her care, she doesn't quite understand what support entails, writing, "Plaintiff takes too narrow a view of what it means to support a child's identity." While plaintiff is correct that disagreement does not equate disparagement, the court also recognizes that the term rejection takes many forms, and it includes the impact that invalidation can have on LGBTQ+ youth. Bates' lawsuit is ongoing now. Her attorney says they've appealed the judge's ruling. Now to the national view. Oregon is one of 35 states, along with Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico, that have laws in place specifically protecting foster youth from discrimination based on their gender or sexual identity. Those are the states you see there in dark green on the map. They are from Movement Advancement Project. That's a nonprofit think tank dedicated to advancing equality and opportunity. 8 other states, the ones in lighter green, have laws protecting foster kids from discrimination on their sexual orientation only. And the rest, 7 other states, they're in the yellow. There are no similar protections there for foster kids. Now, the new rule proposed by the federal government of Health and Human Services wants to change that and make the rule similar to Oregon's a national requirement used by every state. It's part of a child welfare package aimed at supporting kids and families in the foster system that would require caregivers be trained to provide for a foster child's needs related to their sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression, and would mandate that LGBTQ children are placed in a home that is free from hostility toward their identity. Studies show that LGBTQ kids and teens are overrepresented in the foster care system nationwide. That's according to Children's Rights. That's a social justice advocacy group for children. A 2019 study found that 30% of youth in foster care identify as LGBTQ and 5% as transgender. In the general population, roughly 11% of kids identify as LGBTQ and just over 1% transgender. A study by a nonprofit focused on suicide prevention for LGBTQ youth called the Trevor Project showed that being in foster care is especially difficult for marginalized youth. Those who identify as LGBTQ had nearly 4 times greater odds of being kicked out, abandoned, or running away due to treatment based on their identity compared to kids who were never in foster care. Those youths also had 3 times greater odds of reporting a suicide attempt in the past year compared to those who had not been in the system. Another group, Children's Rights, which focuses on the foster system, found that 44% of LGBTQ youth in state custody report they were removed, ran away, or were thrown out of their home for reasons directly related to their identity. Several members of Congress sent a letter to the Health and Human Services Secretary in favor of this proposed rule, including Oregon Senator Ron Wyden. They wrote, "The proposed rule to help ensure LGBTQ children in foster care feel safe and valued and receive appropriate services without discrimination or prejudice. These youth deserve placements that are safe, affirm who they are, and have been cleared by well-trained caseworkers who understand their unique needs." But some Republican lawmakers are pushing back now, basically using the same argument as Jessica Bates is making here in Oregon. Republican attorneys general from 19 states sent their own letter arguing that religious people who want to become foster parents will face discrimination if they refuse to support LGBTQ kids. They wrote, "Caring for children in need is a duty of the Christian faith, and the foster care system depends on individuals and organizations of faith." They went on to say that without faith-based organizations and foster homes, the foster care system would face a critical lack of placement options. They wrote, "The proposed rule will drive individuals and organizations of faith away, which will increase the strain on the system by reducing the number of available foster homes. The federal government should be searching for ways to increase the number of foster homes, not decrease them." They go on to say that many states across the country are facing an overwhelming number of kids in the foster care system and not enough homes to place them in. That is a problem that we've seen here in Oregon as well, with kids housed sometimes in hotels, offices, even former jails at times. Nationwide, more than 391,000 children were in foster care in 2021, according to a report from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So, that's a lot to digest, I know, but it's a big deal. What do you think about this proposed rule in Congress? Should foster parents around the country have to follow rules similar to Oregon's and have to support LGBTQ plus kids and their choices? Or do you side with Jessica Bates and others who believe it infringes on their religion? Let us know, will you? Send us an email. The address is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. Now let's turn to a new near disaster involving the Alaska Airjet that basically had a door blowout during the flight. It was not exactly a door, but something called a plug that's built into the plane when customers like Alaska decide they do not want an emergency exit there. So instead of a door, they plug the space where the door would have gone with, well, sort of a fake door, I guess. It weighs 63 pounds though, so it's not light and real sturdy. Wouldn't want it coming through your roof. And it's held on by bolts. This is a shot of investigators with it after it was found in the backyard in the Beaverton area. So why did it come off? Gregory Feith, a former NTSB investigator, says that is exactly the question the government will work to answer.
But they're also going to be looking at the build back to Boeing from when this airplane was on the line, how it came out of the factory. There's also a vendor who actually makes the fuselage tube for Boeing called Spirit, and they're out of Wichita. So they're going to be looking at their build records. Is this a mechanical malfunction? Is this a materials defect? Is this a human element to done maintenance or improper installation? So there's a variety of things that are going on right now.
The chair of the NTSB confirmed that the auto pressurization system warning on this very exact plane had gone off 3 previous times. Just so we're all on the same page, as the inside of the jet, it has pressurized air. You know that if you've been on an airplane. Above 10,000 feet, there's just not enough oxygen to breathe. So jet makers created a system to keep enough pressure inside the plane as if it was below 10,000 feet as it keeps going up. That way we can all sit there and easily breathe while it climbs to 35,000 feet. That Alaska jet was on its way up and at 16,000 feet when that plug door shot out. Now, if there's a problem with the pressure inside the cabin where we're all sitting, those warning sensors go off. That is what happened on earlier flights. The most recent was January 4th. It happened while the plane was back on the ground at the end of its flight, and that was the day before the door blew off. So, were the sensors trying to tell the maintenance folks that the door bolts were loose? Should the plane have been grounded until they figured that out?
I think that is a key issue. It's been described as, quote, a benign event. Well, nothing is benign when it comes to pressurization. And for them to have put a restriction on the airplane like that, but allow it to fly cross country, which this airplane had done the night before, makes no sense. And so there has to be some real investigative work to find out what policy and procedure Alaska Airlines was using or employed to allow that to happen without fully determining what was causing this pressurization problem. If it's a one-off, it happens one time, that's one thing. But this was on multiple occasions, and they put a restriction on the airplane. That has to be answered.
So as you heard, Alaska had restricted the specific jet to flying over land only and not from Portland to Hawaii, for example. What's the benefit of that? Well, might seem obvious, but the answer is more airports. If something like depressurization happens, you want to be able to land fast. That's not always possible when you're flying over the Pacific Ocean. This pressurization thing is something many of us passengers pretty much take for granted. And most of the time, everything happens just fine. It's perfect. But I think it's a fascinating physics discussion. So for that, we turn to Jim Hummel, who lives in the Portland area and is now retired after being an airline pilot for nearly 30 years.
Well, there'd be the differential pressure, the pressure in the cabin versus the pressure outside. So let's say you're cruising along at 30,000 feet. The interior cabin pressure is probably going to be somewhere between 7,000 and 8,000 feet because the cabin is pressurized. So if you lose a pressurization bulkhead, like a window or a door, then the pressure is going to equalize. And the greater the pressure differential, the more explosive the depressurization is going to be. So they were really lucky that they were at the altitude they were at. Also, I mean, because the oxygen levels in the atmosphere, the higher you are, the less oxygen there is, and there's a time of useful consciousness, which means, say for example, let's start at 35,000 feet. I just looked this up. 15 to 30 seconds is your time of useful consciousness. You'll lose consciousness within 30 seconds at 35,000 feet. So at 30,000 feet, it's about a minute. And down there where they were, it's probably 10 to 15 minutes. So they were very, very lucky to be at such a low altitude.
And also at a higher altitude, possible that big parts of the plane could have been sucked out through that hole too. Back to the investigation. The former NTSB investigator says the team will learn a lot from looking at that recovered door plug.
I think right now, with the inspections taking place, this is an inspection that is just based on cursory information. The investigation as it goes forward, especially the further examination of the door that they've recovered, and of course the actual door frame itself, to determine whether or not this is still a good idea. Does this need to be re-engineered? Do they need to take this door plug out and actually put a fuselage plug in there? And then for those customers that do want that emergency exit, they formally put the exit in there. I mean, there's a lot that's going to be answered. There's also some issues with the cockpit voice recorder and the fact that it got overwritten. So there's a variety of different issues that are starting to develop that are outside of the actual cause. So that's the board's mission, is to look at the primary cause and then any cursory issues that may have an adverse effect on passenger safety.
And then finally, hats off to the crew for acting very smooth in a harrowing situation. The depressurization event was so violent, the chair of the NTSB now says the door to the cockpit actually blew open, that it ripped off the headset of the co-pilot, and the captain lost part of her headset as well. The blast of wind also snatched away their checklist. It's a small miracle that nobody was hurt or killed. The NTSB has a news conference planned for 8 o'clock tonight. Look for the latest on KGW News at 11 and online at kgw.com. Coming up next on The Story, we head to the state of Washington, where lawmakers kicked off the legislative session in Olympia this afternoon. Your usual suspects are on the agenda over the next 60 days. Homelessness, drugs, crime, but there's also talk of a rebate checks for Washingtonians, not for Oregonians. The idea appears to have bipartisan support. We'll explain when The Story returns. Lawmakers in Washington today gathered in Olympia for the start of their legislative session. It's a short session this year, only 60 days during even years. Some of the big issues that they're expected to tackle include finding ways to decrease the number of people experiencing homelessness, making highways safer, and possible changes to the state police's pursuit law. But there's another big issue that could lead to more money in your pocket for those of you north of the Columbia River. Possible rebate checks from the state climate law called the Climate Commitment Act. Its goal is to decrease carbon emissions by charging carbon producers fees. Critics have blamed the policy for raising gas prices, but there's a $1.3 billion surplus from the law now, and rebate ideas appear popular on both sides of the aisle. Governor Jay Inslee has proposed offering a rebate check for utility bills to low-income families. A Democratic senator has suggested reducing car tab prices, and Republicans in the House want to use the surplus to pay every registered car owner $214. So we'll see what ends up happening with that surplus. Here in Oregon, our legislative session begins 4 weeks from today on February 4th. Coming up next on The Story, we're digging for old. We'll take you back out to the Oregon Historical Society's super secret warehouse to show you some of the largest items they store there. Many of you longtime Portlanders will recognize a few for a number of reasons. Stick around for that story when The Story continues.
When we bring people out here to visit the vault, we do sometimes, there's a lot of wow moments. And one of them is happening right around the corner here, when they turn around this corner and they see this. Our collection of, I guess, of vehicles, more or less, some motorized, some not, from throughout history. And again, it shows you the scope of the size of our collection, the size of this vault. With some of my favorite items in it. I love this little machine right here. This was the switchboard for the downtown Myron Frank. Again, Oregon's most iconic store. And you can imagine the switchboard operator connecting you with whatever department you were looking for back in the day. And then the vehicles, you got, you know, old like Cinderella type carriages. One of my favorites back there that you'll see it around front is a horse-drawn hearse. Without the horse, of course, but with the hearse and with a wicker casket in back. The Davidson's bread truck from when Davidson would make home delivery, breads, a lot of other contraptions here, big one-wheeled bicycles, water tankers, almost moving vans from the day from the Northwest Transfer Company, if you were moving anything. A lot of Portlanders will know what this is and have fond memories of. For many, many years, half a century or so, every Christmas, the downtown Myron Frank on the 10th floor would have a Santa Land, where elaborate displays of trees and presents and animatronic elves and reindeer. And around the ceiling was a tram, a small tram where kids would ride in and go around and see Santa Land. This was one of the cars from the Myron Frank Santa Land. You can see how big you would have been sitting there back then. And every time someone sees that who used to go there, they'll say, oh my gosh, it's so much smaller than I remember. Well, you were 2 at the time when you rode there, but a lot of folks have fond memories of Myron Frank Santa Land. I think one of the most iconic items we have here from Oregon history are the green, big, huge green, metallic, obviously machinery here, and panels. These were the control panels of the Trojan nuclear plant. PGE used to run a nuclear plant in Rainier, Oregon, in Columbia County. And you can imagine, I don't know what you can imagine here, but you can imagine Homer Simpson sitting in front of that, or 3 Mile Island, or you be the judge of what you want to imagine. But those were the control panels of the Trojan nuclear plant. This whalebone here, this is a whalebone. It has a interesting past. We believe it is, in their journals, Lewis and Clark refer to a whalebone, or a whale that had washed ashore there on the coast when they were here. And the provenance of this bone suggests that it is the bone from that whale, for sure, that Lewis and Clark referred to. This was the pulpit, the first pulpit of the Vancouver Avenue First Baptist Church, which was the leading church for Black Americans, African Americans in Portland. This was handcrafted by Dr. O.B. Williams, their first preacher, and it's made from apple crates. When Martin Luther King came to Oregon in the early 1960s, he went and spoke at the First Vancouver Avenue Baptist Church, not from this pulpit, this was one previously, but from the pulpit they have now. And where's my pet cow? Oh, there she is. So be quiet here, Bessie's sleeping, but this is obviously a big model of a cow. And why do we have this, you might ask? Well, back in the day, there was this hotel in Portland that was advertised itself as the Cattleman's Hotel. And when the cattlemen would come from Eastern Oregon to Portland for the stockyard, to go to the stockyards or to go to trade their stock, they would stay in the Cattleman's Hotel, and this cow was on top of the hotel. We have a photograph here in our collection of the cow either going up to the top or coming down from the top. I don't know which, but we keep her here as a pet here.
All right, all kinds of fascinating things there. By the way, for those of you wondering about the nuclear control panel, no, there's not any lingering radioactivity in it or on it. We did have that same thought when we were standing about 3 feet away from it, but Carrie assured us everything's safe, it's been checked. That's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching, and remember the story, our collective story, that never ends. The good stuff's coming up next, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow night at 6:30.